Hello, I'm Caleb Monroe, 21 years old, a computer engineering student at Oregon State University. I'm not the type to enjoy telling my life story, but what happened to me and my sister Lila has forced me to speak up. This story isn't easy. It's filled with wounds, betrayal, and a kind of love I never thought I'd have the strength to hold on to. But I'll tell it for Lila, for ourselves, and for everything we've been through. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, where the roads were covered with pine needles and everyone knew each other like the whole town was one big family. Our house sat at the end of a gravel road, a two-story wooden home with a red-tiled roof and a backyard garden full of wild daisies, where Lila used to love running around when she was little. From the outside, the Monroe family seemed perfect. My dad, Daniel, was the head accountant at a large construction company, always dressed in crisp suits, hair neatly combed with a polite smile like he stepped out of an insurance ad. My mom, Marissa, was an elementary school teacher, known for her gentle way with kids and her inspiring speeches at church. Then there was Lila, my sister, 4 years younger than me, who was once the town's ballet star. And me, just an average college student, always glued to my laptop writing code or fixing broken electronics. But behind that beautiful picture, our house was like a ticking time bomb, just waiting for a spark to explode. Lila was the light of our family, or at least she used to be. My sister had eyes that sparkled like stars, long, glossy brown hair, and a smile that could melt anyone. When Lila took the stage, the whole world seemed to stop. I remember those evenings sitting in packed auditoriums, watching her glide like a breeze, her white tutu fluttering, her tiny feet spinning perfectly. Our grandfather, the person closest to us, was always so proud, saying Lila would become a great ballerina. He'd sit next to me, holding my hand tightly, his eyes gleaming as he watched her perform. "Caleb, that girl's an angel," he'd say. And I'd nod, not out of politeness, but because I knew he was right. But 2 years ago, everything fell apart. I still remember that day like it's etched in my mind, though I wish I could erase it. Lila, only 15 at the time, was riding home with our grandfather after a performance in Portland. It was pouring rain. The roads were slick, and a truck lost control, crashing head-on into their car. Our grandfather died on the spot. Lila survived, but the cost was devastating. She was paralyzed from the waist down, never to stand or dance again. I was in my dorm when I got the news, and when I rushed to the hospital, I saw Lila lying there, small and fragile on the bed, her eyes empty. I knelt beside her, holding her hand, trying to say something comforting, but my throat tightened. Lila only whispered, "Caleb, I'm okay," but I knew she was trying to be strong for me. After the accident, our home changed. No, it's more accurate to say its true face was revealed. My parents, who once seemed to adore Lila, began treating her like a burden. I noticed it in the small things. The way Mom sighed whenever she had to push Lila's wheelchair. The way Dad avoided looking her in the eye when he spoke, or the times they argued loudly in their bedroom, thinking Lila couldn't hear. "She's just a burden now," I once overheard Dad mutter when he thought I wasn't home. I wanted to storm in and punch him, but I held back for Lila. I didn't want her to know what our parents were thinking. What made things worse was our grandfather's trust fund. Years earlier, he had set up $1 million fund, leaving it all to Lila when she turned 18. He said it was to ensure she could pursue her dream of becoming a ballerina, knowing our family wasn't well off. When my parents heard about this, they couldn't hide their resentment. They never said it outright, but I saw the way they looked at Lila change. From envy to something colder, darker, especially after the tragic accident 2 years ago. They began controlling Lila more tightly under the guise of caring for her, but I knew they had their eyes on the money. I don't know why they changed so much, but every time I came home on weekends, I could feel the suffocating atmosphere in the house that was once filled with laughter. I study far from home, over 3 hours drive from our town, so I can't be with Lila all the time. But I never stop worrying about her. Lila still tries to stay upbeat, sending me texts with smiley face emojis talking about the books she's reading or the movies she's watched. But I've noticed she's getting thinner, her voice weaker and her smile no longer as bright. One night, she called me at midnight just to ask, "Caleb, do you think I'm useless?" I nearly shouted into the phone. "Lila, don't ever say that. You're the most important person to me." But deep down, I knew she was being hurt by our parents' words and actions. I started suspecting that our parents had some kind of plan regarding Lila. Call it a gut feeling, but I couldn't sit still. I'm a tech guy, so I did what I'm best at, finding a way to protect her. I secretly installed a GPS tracker on Lila's wheelchair, connected to an app on my phone. If anything happened, I'd know where she was. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to worry. Lila deserves to live without fear, especially in her own home. And then the fateful day arrived, the day when all the cruelty and hatred were laid bare. I still remember that day like a knife slicing through my heart. It was a Saturday morning in late autumn, when golden leaves blanketed the roads and the biting cold air carried the scent of forest soil. I was in my dorm, buried in an algorithm assignment when my phone buzzed. A text from Lila. "Caleb, Mom and Dad say they're taking me hiking this weekend. They said they want the family to relax a bit." I read the message and a wave of unease surged in my chest. My parents weren't the hiking type. They hadn't even bothered taking Lila out much since the accident. I texted back, trying to sound casual. "Sounds fun, Lila. Be careful, okay? Call me if anything feels off." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I opened the GPS tracking app on my phone to check Lila's location. The tracker I'd installed in her wheelchair was working fine, sending a steady signal from home. I told myself I was overthinking, but I couldn't stop replaying my parents' behavior. The cold looks, the veiled comments about money, and the way they'd grown increasingly distant from Lila. I decided I'd drive home Sunday morning to check on things just to be sure. But I never could have imagined that, just a few hours later, everything would turn into a nightmare. On Sunday morning, I woke up with a terrible gut feeling. I checked the GPS app and saw the signal from Lila's wheelchair moving about 40 miles from town, toward the national forest near Black Ridge Cliff, a remote area known for its treacherous trails and sheer cliffs. My heart pounded. My parents had never mentioned taking Lila to a place like that. Hiking? With Lila in a wheelchair? It didn't make any sense. I called Lila, but she didn't pick up. I tried Mom, then Dad, but neither answered. A cold dread ran down my spine. I jumped into my car, threw my backpack in the back, and sped off as fast as I could without breaking traffic laws. On the way, I kept checking the GPS app. The signal from Lila's wheelchair had stopped at a point near the main Black Ridge Cliff and hadn't moved since. I whispered to myself, "Stay calm, Caleb. Maybe they're just resting." But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. When I reached the forest, it was almost noon. I parked in a secluded spot near the trailhead where I spotted my parents' SUV parked nearby. I turned off the engine, grabbed my backpack, and hurried down the trail toward the cliff. Each step felt heavier, as if I were walking into something I didn't want to face. I kept my phone in hand, eyes glued to the GPS signal, praying it would lead me to Lila. The trail wound through towering pines with sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground. I heard birds chirping and the wind whistling through the rocky crevices, but no human sounds. Finally, I neared Black Ridge Cliff, a wide clearing where the ground abruptly dropped into a deep, yawning chasm. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. And then I saw them, my parents, standing near the cliff's edge next to Lila's wheelchair. Lila sat there, small and fragile, her brown hair blowing in the wind. She was staring out as if trying to take in the view, but her face was pale, her eyes filled with worry. My dad, Daniel, was saying something to my mom, Marissa, in a low, urgent voice. I couldn't make out the words, but I saw Mom nod, her hands clenched as if holding something back. I crept closer, staying out of sight. Then everything happened so fast I could barely process it. Dad stepped behind Lila's wheelchair, placing his hands on the handles. I thought he was just going to move her, but no. He pushed hard, with a force I'd never seen in him. Lila's wheelchair lurched forward, rolling over the edge of the cliff and disappearing into the abyss. Lila screamed, a short, terrified cry, before it was swallowed by the void. My blood froze, my head spun. I wanted to scream, to run forward, but my feet felt nailed to the ground. My parents stood there, staring down into the chasm. No panic, no tears. Mom turned to Dad and whispered, "It's done." He nodded, his face cold as stone. They turned and walked back toward the trail as if they'd just completed a routine task. I hid behind a rock, my breath ragged, my hands gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to chase them, to punch them in the face, but I didn't. Lila, my sister. She was down there somewhere, and I had to find her. After my parents left, I rushed to the cliff's edge to assess the situation. I looked down, my heart pounding, searching for any sign of Lila. The drop was dizzying with jagged rocks below. I spotted her wheelchair overturned on a ledge about 20 meters down. It was wrecked, but I could make out a small figure beside it. Lila. She was alive, but I didn't know how badly she was hurt. I didn't think twice. I had to get to her. I found a narrow, slippery path down the cliff, treacherous and steep. Each step tested my courage. When I got close, I saw Lila lying motionless, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. But she was breathing, faintly but still there. The wheelchair had absorbed most of the impact, saving her life. I knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms, whispering, "Lila, I'm here. You're going to be okay." She opened her eyes, her voice trembling. "Caleb, they pushed me." I squeezed her hand, fighting back tears. "I know, Lila. I'll take care of everything." I reached for my phone to call for help, but deep in the chasm there wasn't a single bar of signal. I hoisted Lila onto my back, carefully climbing out of the chasm. Every step on the slick trail felt like a battle with myself. Lila rested on my back, her small, light body feeling so fragile I feared one misstep would make her slip away again. Her hands clung weakly to my shoulders, her faint breaths brushing against my neck, each one a reminder that she was still alive, that I still had a chance to save her. Blackridge Cliff was cold and merciless, its sharp rocks seeming to claw at me, the wind whistling through the ravines like fate's mocking laughter. I gritted my teeth, sweat dripping down my forehead, soaking my shirt. "Keep going, Caleb," I told myself. "Just get Lila out of here." The trail up from the chasm was so narrow I had to lean into the cliff, gripping gnarled tree roots protruding from the rock to keep my balance. Lila whimpered softly now and then, each sound stabbing my heart. "Caleb, it hurts," she whispered, her voice so faint I had to strain to hear. I paused for a second. "I know, Lila. Hang on a little longer. You're almost safe, I promise." But inside, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. The chasm yawned below, and every step tested my courage. I kept replaying the moment I saw Lila's wheelchair plummet, her scream echoing then fading. The image of Dad pushing the chair, Mom's stone-cold face looped in my mind. How could they do this to their own daughter? I wanted to scream, to curse them, but I couldn't let my emotions take over. Lila needed me to stay sharp. I took a deep breath, the scent of forest soil and pine filling my lungs, and kept climbing. Each step was a reminder. I was all Lila had left, and I wouldn't let her be alone again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the faint light of the trail above. I carried Lila up, setting her down on a flat rock, checking her injuries. The blood on her forehead had stopped, but her face was pale, her lips bluish from the cold. I took off my jacket, wrapping it around her to warm her small frame. "Lila, can you hear me? We need to get to the hospital now." She nodded weakly, eyes closed, but her hand still gripped mine tightly, as if it were her last tether to the world. I lifted Lila more gently this time and ran to the car. Every step was agony, my muscles screaming, but I didn't care. I placed her in the back seat, buckled her in, and jumped into the driver's seat. The drive to the nearest town was over 30 miles, and I knew I had to hurry. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Caleb, your sister went missing on the hike. We're at the police station. Come home now. I stared at the message, my throat bitter with rage. Missing? They dared call it missing? While I sped toward the hospital, my parents had already begun their charade at the town police station. I could picture it clearly, even though I wasn't there. Later, when I reviewed the police reports, they detailed that day vividly. My mom, Marissa, sat in a chair, eyes red, tears streaming down her cheeks. She clutched her face, shoulders trembling, spinning a fabricated story in a choked voice. We just wanted to take Lila on a picnic. She said she wanted to see the view from the cliff. Then her wheelchair slipped and we couldn't stop it. My dad, Daniel, stood beside her, his face grave, nodding in agreement. We tried to find her, but the chasm was too deep. We fear the worst has happened. Their lies flowed smoothly as if they'd rehearsed 100 times. The officer, a middle-aged man with a weary face, scribbled their statements, his eyes full of sympathy. We'll organize a search right away, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, but that area's harsh. The chances aren't good. After their statement, the police led a rescue team to Black Ridge Cliff, where Lila's mangled wheelchair lay on a ledge. No trace of Lila, no body, nothing but debris and a few dried bloodstains. The rescue team leader shook his head, telling my parents, if she fell here, her chances of survival are almost zero. This forest is cold and in her condition. He trailed off, but my parents nodded, feigning grief. Mom even sobbed louder, clinging to Dad as if her world had collapsed. But in their minds, I knew. They were calculating. The $1 million trust fund from our grandfather, the money they'd coveted for so long, now seemed within reach. They thought Lila was dead, that no one would question their perfect accident story. They returned home, starting to prepare paperwork, contacting lawyers to access the trust. Dad probably sat in his office planning how to spend the money. Mom likely wiped her crocodile tears, looking in the mirror and telling herself she'd done what she had to. They didn't know Lila was alive, lying in a hospital bed 30 miles away with me by her side. They didn't know I'd witnessed everything the moment they pushed my sister's wheelchair into the chasm, the moment they walked away without a shred of remorse. And they didn't know that I, Caleb Monroe, a 21-year-old student with nothing but love for my sister, had sworn to make them pay for their crime. I sat by Lila in the emergency room, holding her hand, watching the heart monitor's curves. She was alive, and that was what mattered most. But inside me, a fire burned. I wouldn't let my parents get away with this. Never. The hospital emergency room was stifling with the smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of machines. Lila lay on the bed, her eyes closed, her skin pale under the fluorescent lights. A bandage wrapped around her forehead and an IV line was inserted into her arm, dripping slowly as if reminding me that she was still fighting. I sat on the hard plastic chair, gripping Lila's hand tightly, feeling her fragile fingers in my palm. Each faint breath she took was a promise that I would never leave her alone again. The doctor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a deep voice, entered the room. The girl was in shock and lost blood, but there's no serious internal organ damage. You were lucky to get her here in time. I nodded, forcing a grateful smile, but my mind was consumed with the image of our parents standing by the cliff, pushing Lila's wheelchair into the abyss. Will she be okay? I asked, my voice hoarse. The doctor looked at me, his gaze kind but cautious. She needs time. We'll move her to the recovery ward tomorrow morning. You should rest a bit. Rest? I couldn't. Not while my parents were out there playing the role of grieving parents, when the truth was they had tried to kill their own daughter. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. I needed to keep Lila's survival a secret. If my parents found out, they'd try to finish what they started. I took out my phone and powered it off to prevent anyone from contacting me. I didn't know if they suspected anything, but I couldn't take the risk. Lila, I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me. I'll protect you. I promise. The next morning, Lila was moved to a small recovery room. She was awake, though still weak. When she saw me, she smiled. A faint smile, but enough to warm my heart. "Caleb, I dreamed you carried me up from the cliff," she said, her voice as soft as a breeze. I sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. "That wasn't a dream, Lila. I got you out of there." She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. They didn't want me to live, did they?" I wanted to lie, to shield her from the cruel truth, but Lila was smarter than that. I only nodded, squeezing her hand tightly. "But you have me, and I won't let them hurt you again." Over the next few days, I stayed at the hospital, sleeping on a foldable chair next to Lila's bed. I told the nurses I was her only family, and I asked them to keep her presence confidential. "Our family is in trouble," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "Please don't let anyone know my sister is here." The head nurse, an older woman with empathetic eyes, nodded. "We understand, young man. We'll keep it quiet." Lila slowly recovered, though it was gradual. She started eating small amounts of porridge, and color returned to her cheeks. But whenever our parents were mentioned, she fell silent, her gaze distant. I knew she was hurting, not just physically but emotionally. So was I. Every night as Lila slept, I sat by the window staring at the pitch-black sky, the fire of anger burning stronger within me. My parents hadn't just betrayed Lila, they'd betrayed me and all the years we called ourselves a family. I swore they would pay, not out of hatred but for justice. For Lila, for Grandpa, and for myself. I began to plan. First, I needed evidence. The GPS tracker on Lila's wheelchair was a start. I checked the data on my phone. It recorded her exact route from home to the Black Ridge Cliff. I downloaded the data to my laptop, carefully storing it on an encrypted hard drive. But GPS data alone wasn't enough. I needed something undeniable, something that would prevent my parents from covering up their crime. I remembered the small camera I'd installed near the house, originally to check for intruders while I was away at school. It wasn't high-end, but it recorded everything in front of the house, including my parents' conversations when they thought no one was listening. I decided to return home to retrieve the camera's data. Maybe it had captured something. A word, a glance, anything that could serve as evidence. Before leaving the hospital, I checked on Lila. She was asleep, her breathing steady. I wrote a small note and left it by her pillow. "I'm going to get some things. I'll be back soon. Don't worry, Lila." I kissed her forehead and quietly left, my heart heavy but resolute. Driving back to town, I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. Our house stood silent in the darkness, the streetlights casting cold streaks across the windows. I parked a few houses away and walked to the back alley, knowing my parents never paid attention to it. My heart pounded. Every small sound, the rustle of leaves, a distant dog barking, made me jump. I unlocked the back door and stepped inside, keeping my footsteps as light as possible. My parents weren't home. They were probably at the police station, continuing their act as a grieving family. I went straight to the living room, where the camera was hidden in a small crevice on the bookshelf. I removed the memory card, plugged it into my laptop, and started reviewing the footage. Most of it was mundane. My parents coming and going, Mom carrying trash bags, Dad checking the mail. But then I found a clip from a few days before the hiking trip. My parents stood at the front door, their voices low and tense. "We have to do something, Daniel," Mom said, clutching her shoulders. "That money was supposed to be ours. Lila, she doesn't need it anymore." Dad nodded, his eyes cold as stone. "The hiking trip is our chance. No one will suspect an accident." I froze, my blood boiling. This video was gold. It didn't directly prove they pushed Lila, but it showed their intent. I copied the footage, tucked the memory card into my pocket, and left the house as quickly as I'd come. Back at the hospital, I found Lila awake, reading a book I'd left her. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes were still filled with worry. "Where did you go?" she asked. I sat down, taking her hand. "I went to get something that'll make sure Mom and Dad can't deny what they did." Lila looked at me, then nodded, as if she understood I was doing something bigger than both of us. From that day on, I started contacting Grandpa's old lawyer who had helped him set up the trust fund. I sent him the video and GPS data explaining everything. He promised to help but asked for more evidence, ideally direct footage of the crime. I knew that would be difficult, but I wouldn't give up. I would find a way. I would make my parents pay, not just for Lila, but for everything they'd destroyed. That night, as Lila grew more alert, I pulled my chair close to her bed, lowering my voice. "Lila, I have an idea," I began, trying to keep my tone calm despite my pounding heart. "But it could be dangerous. I need your agreement." Lila looked at me, her eyes shining with the trust I'd always cherished. "Caleb, what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice weak but resolute. I told her my plan. Spread a rumor that Lila had been saved by a stranger, that she'd mumbled about being harmed by our parents. I would conceal my identity, making our parents think they were still safe, but just enough to provoke them into acting. "If they're scared of being exposed," I said, "they'll do something reckless, and I'll catch them." Lila was silent for a moment, her fingers twisting the corner of her blanket. "I'm scared, Caleb," she whispered. "If they know I'm alive." I took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "I won't let them touch you. I swear." Lila looked at me, then nodded. A slow but firm nod. "I trust you. Do it." I smiled, though my heart was heavy. Lila was small, but she was stronger than anyone I'd ever known. I got to work that night, using an anonymous account on local social media groups where townsfolk loved to gossip. I posted a short message. "Heard that Lila Monroe was saved by a man after the accident at Black Ridge Cliff. She mumbled that her parents pushed her down. Anyone know more details?" I added a few vague details, enough to stir confusion but not reveal I was behind it. The post spread quickly like a spark igniting dry grass. People buzzed with speculation, some skeptical, others curious. I knew my parents would see it. 2 days later, my plan started to bear fruit. I received a message from the head nurse saying my parents had contacted the hospital, claiming they'd heard Lila was alive and wanted to visit. They were crying, saying they thought they'd lost their daughter, the nurse recounted, her tone laced with doubt. I gave a cold smile. They were panicking, and I knew they weren't coming out of love. They were coming to ensure Lila couldn't speak again. I instructed the nurse to keep my presence a secret, only saying that Lila had been brought in by a stranger and was recovering. I also asked them to watch for any suspicious behavior from my parents. Lila, though anxious, agreed to play the part of a frail, quiet patient. "I'll pretend to sleep if they ask anything," she said, her eyes glinting with a spark of mischief I hadn't seen in a while. I ruffled her hair. "You're amazing, Lila." That afternoon, my parents arrived at the hospital. I hid in a nearby storage room, watching through a crack in the door. My mother, Marissa, wore her familiar pale green dress, clutching a small paper bag, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. My father, Daniel, stood beside her, his expression grim, holding a bottle of mineral water. They entered Lila's room, my mother's voice sickeningly sweet. "Lila, darling, I'm so glad. I thought we'd lost you." Lila lay on the bed, her eyes half closed, unresponsive. I saw my father place the water bottle on the bedside table, then exchange a glance with my mother, a cold, calculating look. When a nurse came in to check on Lila, my parents stepped out briefly to speak with the doctor. I seized the chance, slipping into the room and grabbing the water bottle and paper bag, which contained a box of homemade cookies. I stuffed them into my backpack, my heart racing. A gut feeling told me these weren't safe. I asked a friend from school who had connections at the university lab to analyze the water and cookies. I didn't give details, just said I suspected something was wrong. The test results came back the next morning. The water contained a small amount of poison, a high-dose sedative, enough to cause unconsciousness or even death if not treated promptly. The cookies were clean, likely just a decoy to gain Lila's trust to drink the water. I gripped the lab report, a mix of rage and relief washing over me. They'd fallen into my trap just as I'd predicted. They couldn't control their panic, and now I had another crucial piece of evidence to bring them down. I returned to the hospital and told Lila everything. She listened, her hands trembling, but her eyes no longer held fear. "They really wanted to kill me, Caleb," she said, her voice sad but resilient. "But I'm not afraid of them anymore." I hugged her, feeling her small heart beating strongly. "You don't have to be. I'll take care of everything." I contacted Grandpa's lawyer, James Harper, again. I sent him all the evidence, the GPS data, the home camera footage, and the lab results for the poison. "Caleb," he said over the phone, his voice steady but firm, "you have enough to file a case, but we need to be careful. This isn't just a civil lawsuit, it's a criminal case. I'll reach out to the authorities." I nodded, though he couldn't see. "Thank you, sir. I just want them to pay for attempted murder." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "Let's move forward, Mr. Harper. I want to make sure they never have the chance to hurt Lila or anyone else again." The days leading up to the trial were an unrelenting string of tension. Every night I sat beside Lila in the hospital, holding her hand, trying to keep us both calm. But inside I was a volcano waiting to erupt. Mr. Harper, Grandpa's lawyer, had finalized the lawsuit. "Caleb," he said over the phone, his voice low but sharp, "we have strong evidence. The GPS data, the video, and the toxicology report. But your parents won't go down easily. They have a reputation, and they'll exploit it." I gripped the phone, picturing my parents' fake smiles at parent-teacher meetings or town festivals. They'd always played the part of model citizens, but now I would tear off their masks. News of the lawsuit spread like wildfire. My anonymous social media post had stirred the town, and when the summons reached my parents, Daniel and Marissa Monroe, I knew they were shaken. Mr. Harper recounted how my father had called him, his voice trembling but feigning composure. "This is a misunderstanding, Mr. Harper. We love Lila. How could we hurt our own daughter?" Mr. Harper, cold as stone, simply replied, "Tell that to the court, Mr. Monroe." My mother, according to an acquaintance, had shown up at the lawyer's office, tears streaming, begging to meet him to explain. But Mr. Harper refused, and a restraining order was issued, barring my parents from contacting or approaching me or Lila before the trial. I knew they were panicking. Once I received a text from an unknown number, surely my mother using a new SIM. "Caleb, you've misunderstood. We just want to see Lila to talk to you." I deleted the message, my hands shaking with rage. They didn't want to talk. They wanted control to ensure Lila stayed silent. I forwarded the number to Mr. Harper, asking him to alert the police if they tried contacting me again. The restraining order was strictly enforced, and I heard my father had exploded at the police station, shouting that this is slander. But no one believed them anymore. The town was whispering, and suspicious glances began following them. The trial began on an early winter morning, with Oregon's sky blanketed in gray clouds and a drizzle falling like cold tears. The small county courthouse was packed. Neighbors, old friends, Lila's teachers, and even reporters from Portland with cameras and notepads. The town's atmosphere was heavy, like the calm before a storm. I overheard whispers at the coffee shop, at the grocery store. How could they do that to their own daughter? I always thought the Monroes were perfect. Those words pained and angered me. Perfect? It was just a performance my parents had mastered. I wheeled Lila into the courtroom, feeling dozens of eyes on us. Lila wore a light blue sweater, her brown hair neatly tied back, her eyes bright but tense. She gripped my hand, her fingers ice cold. "Caleb, I'm scared," she whispered. I leaned down, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't have to be. I'm here, and the truth is on our side." She nodded faintly, but I knew she was summoning all her strength. So was I. The courtroom was stifling, the scent of old wood and musty papers mingling in the air. The wooden benches creaked with every shift in posture. Light from the windows cast shadows through faded curtains onto the walls. My parents sat across the room, separated from Lila and me by a row of seats, but feeling like an ocean apart. My father, Daniel, wore a pristine gray suit, but his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. My mother, Marissa, in a simple black dress, kept dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, but I knew it was an act. When their gazes met ours, I saw a flicker of panic. My mother quickly looked away, but my father stared, his eyes cold yet laced with fear. I squeezed Lila's hand, silently vowing, "Today, you won't escape." Mr. Harper stood, his voice resonating, deep but sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, today we address an unforgivable crime, the attempted murder of Lila Monroe, an innocent girl, by her own parents, Daniel and Marissa Monroe." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few people gasped, hands covering mouths. The judge, an older man with a stern face, banged his gavel for order. Mr. Harper presented the evidence with the precision of someone who'd prepared for this moment his entire life. First was the GPS data from Lila's wheelchair. He projected a digital map on the screen, red dots tracing the route from our house to Black Ridge Cliff, stopping exactly where Lila was pushed. "This was not a joyful family outing," he said, his voice steely. "This was a calculated plan to kill." I glanced at my parents. My mother bowed her head, clutching her handkerchief, while my father sat rigid, lips pressed tight. Next was the video from the home camera. As the screen played the clip of my parents whispering about opportunity and accident before the hiking trip, the courtroom fell silent. "We have to do something, Daniel," my mother's voice echoed from the speakers, cold and sharp. "That money was supposed to be ours." My father nodded, saying, "The hiking trip is our chance. No one will suspect." Murmurs rose again, and I saw an older woman in the back row shake her head, tears streaming. My parents didn't dare look up, but I noticed my mother's hands trembling and my father gripping the armrest as if to break it. The final piece was the poisoned water bottle. Mr. Harper held up the lab report, his voice booming. "This bottle, brought by the defendants to the hospital, contained a high dose of sedative, enough to cause coma or death." A groan escaped the crowd. I looked at my parents. My mother turned to my father, her eyes frantic, as if blaming him for leaving evidence. My father only bowed his head, his face ashen. Mr. Harper called a chemist who testified that the poison couldn't be a mix-up from a prescription, as my parents claimed. The head nurse from the hospital also testified, describing their odd behavior when visiting Lila, like how they placed the bottle near her and left quickly. When it was Lila's turn to testify, the room's air grew thick. I wheeled her to the witness stand, my heart pounding. Small and frail, her voice trembled but was clear. "I thought my parents loved me," she said, looking straight at them. "But they pushed me off the cliff. I heard my mother say, 'It's done,' as I fell. If not for Caleb, I'd be dead." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "I just want to know why." As she spoke, I saw my mother sob, but not from remorse, it was panic. My father stared at Lila, his eyes empty as if he were no longer human. I gripped the wheelchair's handles, fighting back tears. Lila was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and I'd never been prouder of her. My parents tried to counter. My mother wailed, her voice shrill. "It was an accident. We didn't mean it." My father, with feigned calm, claimed the water bottle was a mix-up from an old prescription. But their words carried no weight. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury's skeptical glances said it all. After 4 days of trial, the jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict. The judge stood, his voice striking like a hammer. "Daniel and Marissa Monroe are found guilty of first-degree attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder." My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably while my father stood frozen, his face pale as wax. They were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, their eyes avoiding Lila and me. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble. "It's over, Lila," I whispered. "We're free." The trial was over, but its echoes lingered like an undercurrent in my heart. As I wheeled Lila out of the courthouse, the weak winter afternoon sunlight illuminated her face, highlighting her small but resilient smile. "Caleb," she whispered, gripping my hand. "What do we do now?" I looked down at her. her eyes bright despite the nightmare we'd endured, and I knew that though everything had shattered, we still had each other. "We'll start over, Lila," I said, my voice firm. "A new place, a new life, just you and me." We left town the following week. I couldn't stay in a place where every street corner, every glance reminded me of what our parents had done. The small Oregon town, once our home, was now just a painful memory. With Mr. Harper's help, I finalized the paperwork to access Grandpa's trust fund for Lila. The $1 million, once the cause of betrayal, became our lifeline for a new future. I chose Seattle, a city big enough for us to blend into the crowd without anyone knowing the Monroe family's story. I rented a small apartment near a lush green park where Lila could breathe fresh air without curious stares. The apartment had large windows overlooking the city skyline, and I often found Lila sitting there, sketching in a notebook, her eyes sparkling as if rediscovering light. Lila began her recovery journey not just physically but emotionally. The trust fund covered intensive physical therapy, helping her regain some strength in her arms and improve her mobility. But what made me proudest was how she rediscovered joy through art. One day, returning from university, I found her painting a watercolor, a sunset over a field of wild daisies like the old garden at home. "I miss Grandpa," she said softly. "He always told me to paint to hold on to my dreams." I sat beside her, silently watching her gentle brushstrokes glide across the paper. Lila could no longer dance, but her hands still told stories, and I knew Grandpa would be smiling if he saw. I didn't stop either. I completed my computer engineering program at the University of Washington, pouring my heart into graduating on time. But my dreams had grown beyond coding or fixing computers. Lila had inspired me, and I wanted to do something bigger. With savings from scholarships and part of the trust fund, I started a small tech company focused on developing assistive devices for people with disabilities. Our first product was a smart wheelchair, equipped with sensors and GPS, adjustable to fit each user's needs. I named it Lila, not just for my sister, but for everyone like her who deserved to live freely and safely. Each time we tested the product, I thought of Lila, of the day I carried her up from the cliff, and I vowed to keep going. Months after we settled in Seattle, a strange feeling lingered. Lila and I had built a new home, but the shadow of the past still loomed, like a cold draft through a cracked door. Though our parents, Daniel and Marissa, were convicted and serving time in state prison, I couldn't deny they'd once been part of our lives. Childhood memories. Dad teaching me to ride a bike, Mom baking cookies for Lila, resurfaced, now tainted with pain. I wondered if they felt remorse or were just steeped in resentment. Lila, with a heart more generous than mine, was the first to suggest it. "Caleb," she said one evening over dinner, I want to see Mom and Dad, just once. I want to know how they are." I froze. "Lila, are you sure, after everything they did?" She nodded, her eyes bright but thoughtful. "I'm not forgiving them, Caleb, but I want closure. I want to see them, to know I'm not afraid anymore." I looked at her, seeing the strength I'd always admired. "All right," I sighed. "If you want this, I'll go with you." We visited the Oregon State Prison on an early morning, with fog still cloaking the road to the stark gray complex. The prison loomed cold, its towering concrete walls and barbed wire glinting faintly in the dim light. I wheeled Lila through the security gate, my heart pounding. A middle-aged guard with a stern face checked our documents and led us through long corridors where the clank of locks and echo of footsteps reverberated. Lila held my hand, her fingers cold but steady. "You okay?" she whispered. I forced a smile, squeezing her hand. "I'm fine. You?" She nodded slightly, her gaze resolute. We were ushered into a small visitation room, a thick glass pane separating us from the prisoner's side. Lila and I sat facing two empty chairs across the glass. My stomach churned, unsure what I expected. When the door on the other side opened, Mom stepped in first, followed by Dad. They looked different, no longer the model citizens of our town. Mom was thinner, her hair loosely tied, her face pale without makeup. Dad, once impeccable in suits, wore an orange prison uniform, his eyes sunken, a scruff of beard on his chin. When they saw us, Mom burst into tears. "Lila, Caleb," she whispered through the phone, her voice breaking. Dad sat silently, his gaze shifting from me to Lila as if searching for something. Forgiveness, or just confirmation we were really there. Anger surged in me, but I held it back for Lila. She spoke first, her voice soft but clear. "Mom, Dad," she began, "I'm not here to forgive you. I just want to say I'm alive and I'm going to live well. I don't want to carry fear anymore." Mom bowed her head, tears falling onto her hands. "Lila, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." Her voice cracked, but I wasn't sure if it was remorse or desperation. Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Caleb, you have to understand, we were wrong. But we didn't mean—" I cut him off, unable to bear it. "Stop lying, Dad. You pushed Lila off a cliff. You chose money over your daughter." He looked at me, his eyes empty, then lowered his head, silent. Lila placed her hand on mine as if urging me to stay calm. "I don't hate you," she said evenly, "but I'll never forget. I just want you to know that Caleb and I will live well without you." I looked at her, my heart aching yet proud. Lila was small but stronger than anyone in that room. The visit lasted less than 10 minutes. When Mom tried to ask about our new life, I stood, wheeling Lila out. "That's enough," I said coldly. "We came for closure, not to reopen wounds." Lila said nothing, but I saw her exhale in relief as we left the stifling room. On the drive back, Lila was quiet, staring out the car window. I knew what she was thinking. "You okay?" I asked. She turned, smiling faintly. "I'm fine, Caleb. I just needed to know they can't hurt me anymore." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. The visit didn't bring forgiveness, but it gave us the closure we both needed. One late spring afternoon, I wheeled Lila to the park near our apartment. We stopped on a small hill where we could see the sun setting in the west, painting the sky in vibrant orange. The last rays shimmered on the lake, and a breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. Lila leaned her head on my shoulder, her brown hair fluttering lightly. "Caleb," she said, her voice clear, "I used to think I'd never smile again. But now I feel happy." I turned, seeing her smile, a real smile, unforced, free of pain. "You make me happy, Lila," I replied, my voice catching. "You've always been my light." We sat there, quietly watching the sunset. From being betrayed by our own parents, pushed into the darkness of despair, we'd found strength in our sibling bond. Lila, despite the challenges of her wheelchair, had reclaimed her optimism like wild daisies blooming after a storm. And I, once a struggling student haunted by the fear of losing her, had become her protector, friend, and inspiration. We didn't just survive, we built a new life, where pain no longer defined us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a final streak of light in the sky, Lila squeezed my hand, whispering, "Thank you, Caleb, for never abandoning me." I squeezed back, tears silently falling. "I'll never abandon you, Lila. Never."